we get into that mode where we say, I'm going to take care of me, I'm going to get my stuff done. And when that happens, it's contagious. And then you have a group of individuals working alongside each other. You don't actually have a team.
Okay, folks, this week's show, you would have thought I would have done this a lot sooner, but this week's show is all about teams. And who doesn't need to spend time on teams? Of all the issues that I hear with my clients and all the organizations I work with, getting their team functioning at a high level is probably top of the list, if not really, really close. So I am so thankful to have our guest today. Our guest today is Rusty Chadwick. He's the director of WinShape Teams. He served there since 2010. He's the author of the book, Teamwork, 13 Timeless Principles for Creating Success and Fulfillment as a Team Member. He's also the executive producer of For the Team, a documentary on team performance in the grueling endurance sport of adventure racing. I mean, the guy's an expert on teams, and he's seen lots and lots of teams. So I really want you to pay attention to not only the best practices that he recommends all high-performing teams need to have right now, but the warning signs. He had several, and I think the warning signs he shared were so relevant and timely to the things we're facing today. So I took lots of notes. Stay tuned to the end of the show, and I'll hit all the points. But I think you're going to really, really enjoy the show today.
The Workplace Therapist Show is sponsored by the Leadership Foundry. Bringing a cutting-edge, real-world approach to leadership development, the Leadership Foundry partners with each client organization to create a custom-tailored experience, virtual or in person, that combines innovative leadership content, world-class facilitators, and one-on-one coaching to ensure your leaders have everything they need to grow and thrive. To find out more and to design your one-of-a-kind program, visit myleadershipfoundry.com.
Well, Rusty, I'm really excited about our conversation today. You know, it's funny. I talk about a lot of things, and you would think teams would be something that I talk about all the time, but really it doesn't come up in conversation as much as it probably should. So this is a great opportunity for us to just dive in and just spend our entire time today talking about teams. And since you're everything teams, high-performing teams, endurance teams, work teams, family teams, I feel honored to have you on today as a guest. So maybe a good starting place, Rusty, tell us a little bit about kind of your background. What got you into this passion for teams? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing today, and then we can jump right in on what you think we need to be doing to make our teams better.
Oh, yeah, Brandon. Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate you having the conversation today. Yeah, teams, it is interesting that you say we talk about teams less maybe than we could or should. We talk about leadership all the time. And of course, that's a vastly important subject, but teams sometimes don't get as much attention. And so I think that for me, my background really, I didn't study teams specifically in school or anything like that. Like many people, I just was a part of teams and worked with other people. And over the course of my career, I worked out in Colorado and guest ranching, did a variety of things, and found my way to WinShape Foundation, 10 or 12 years ago, and really started engaging with people around this concept of relationship at work, at home, and working in a team. And what I kind of quickly discovered was that being on a team is not necessarily confined to one area, like a sports team or work. But anytime you're working with somebody else to accomplish something, you're on a team. And so really, whether it's a marriage or a family or, a community event or work, that's teams. And so I really just became interested in how do we improve our relationships and our ability to work with others to get things done. And that, ever since about 2010, and I've been here at WinShape, working with teams, learning from teams, and trying to find out how to do that well. So, of course, I have hobbies that take me into some team experiences as well in endurance sports, other things, because relationships are just so critical and vital. But it's been a journey and a privilege, and still learning along the way.
So I've had the experience of WinShape. It's been some time, but tell us a little bit for folks who are new and don't really know what WinShape does. Talk a little about kind of what when a team comes to you, what are the kinds of things you have them experience to get them functioning better?
Yeah, so WinShape Teams really is built on the idea that we're going to have the most effective learning when we incorporate experiences. And so we really try to combine meaningful content, something that you can learn from and use, with intentional, engaging experiences that bring that content to life. And so we've all had the experience of sitting and absorbing information, and there's a value to that, of course, to learn. But I think that for teams, there's a real opportunity to get in the mix and engage with one another in activities, experiences that immerse us in opportunities to see how we do function. And then we can step away from that and look back and say, okay, what did I see? What did I experience? And how do we apply that to what's next? So when teams engage with WinShape, we have a variety of things we do, from open enrollment kind of individual experiences to team experiences. But really, it's all predicated on this philosophy of experiential learning. And so that's really what and sometimes that's typical what people might expect using a ropes course or a challenge course they might have experienced in the past. Other times it's a completely different type of experience that may be fully immersive, like a search and rescue experience where we manufacture an experience here on the mountain, and you actually have to go and complete a task that really you almost can't hide from how you naturally engage. You get so involved, and that's the best, because then we can really say, what happened? Why is that important? And what do we do about that? And we go from there.
Yeah. So what I love about what you described is, you put teams in highly emotional or high energy environments. So they can't just intellectualize their way out of it. I mean, they're either under stress or they're really involved. And then you see them, perform in their real honest way that they would probably perform in the world, because the world is high energy and high emotion. So what are some of the things that you notice the best teams do? Maybe that's a good starting place for us. When you think about teams that kind of function the best, what does a high functioning team look like? And then we can talk about all the traps and things that kind of get in our way.
Yeah, I think, when we talk about a high performing team, there are really two things you observe. One is their purposes are accomplished, and two, their people are fulfilled. Those two things have to be in place. So if you see a team that can really work to get things done, but people are miserable, then that's not a high-performing team. And in honesty, it's very unlikely that those results are going to last. People don't perform at a high level over time sustainably when their people are not fulfilled. But if everyone's fulfilled and having a great time, but nothing's getting done, that won't really last either, because there's a sense of fulfillment that comes from accomplishing things. And so I think that if either of those things exist in isolation, it's not high performing. And if neither of them are there, which is often common, then you really don't have a high performing team. So purposes accomplished and people fulfilled, that's what we see is the case. Some of the hallmarks of that, the things that you can see in teams that are really performing well, obviously there's a high level of trust between the team members. There's a level of safety in the team. They engage with one another in healthy conflict. They encourage one another. They build one another up. I think that when I think about team members as a part of teams, you can start to see health when you have individual members that are exhibiting personal excellence in the work they do, but also sacrificial service as they engage with others on the team. And both of those really have to be the case for a team to be high performing among a lot of other things. So.
Okay, so maybe this is an unfair question, okay, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How long does it take to make a high performing team?
That is a hard question. I don't know that there's a formula. I do think it's probably very unlikely that a high performing team can develop extremely quickly because things like trust take time to build, and safety takes time to establish. I think that a lot of that probably depends on the health of the individual members that are joining that team. A team can really only be as successful and high performing as the team members are healthy. Because if you think about it, a team really is a collection of individuals at its basic form. And so I think that you can obviously have a head start on building a high-performing team if you're bringing in healthy individuals who have established discipline and rhythms in their personal lives. They're helping them be healthy, that have healthy familiar relationships, community. That's a big part. But as far as the time it takes, I would say that probably would drastically differ, between the teams that you might find. So yeah, but I would say maybe the short answer would be it does take time. It's not going to happen overnight.
Okay, so you unpacked it a little bit, but I got to go further. You talked about healthy individuals. So let's say someone's listening right now and they're saying to themselves, all right, I like this idea of healthy individuals. I'm only going to hire healthy individuals. Right. So they need now a checklist of what does it mean to have a healthy individual? What would be the things you want to look out for that would be kind of defined as healthy? And then maybe even the flip, what are the watch outs?
Well, I think that healthy individuals typically have an understanding, they're highly self-aware. And so with that, self-awareness, I think, is one of the most critical components of a healthy and successful team member, because all of us have blind spots, all of us have deficiencies. And so all of us have strengths and gifts. And when we understand those well, we can perform much better for the group. And so when you see individuals who are self-aware, oftentimes that comes from a place of health outside of the workplace. And so that may be that they have established disciplines in their lives that they can speak to. So a question might be, what are some of the personal disciplines that you have in your life that help keep you on track? And then you're listening for things. Do they have, a shutdown routine at night that helps them to prepare for the day ahead? Do they have a morning routine that allows them to have time for quiet preparation and for the day? What are their exercise habits? What are their eating habits? What are their sleep habits? All of those components are really important to developing a healthy lifestyle. It's very difficult to show up full, whole, and healthy when you have no disciplines in other parts of your life that are helping to keep you on track. And so I think a discipline question would be a really good one. As a place to start.
Yeah, that's great. Excellent. Okay. So something else in all the years that I've, talked to, students about teams and engaged with teams, there always comes up this interesting question. So I'm going to pose this question to you. How important is it to have a strong leader in order to have a high performing team? That seems to be a common question. And I hear a lot of debate around the answer to that question. So I'd be curious to your perspective.
I think that it is critically important to have a strong leader, to have a healthy team. A good friend of WinShape's and of mine, Mark Miller at Chick-fil-A, he's a senior leader at Chick-fil-A, been there a long time. And he says, everything rises and falls on leadership. And I think there's a sense in which having a strong and effective leader does not guarantee a healthy team. But it is very difficult to have a healthy team with a poor leader, because the leader's influence is so outsized in the team that it's very difficult to overcome a poor leadership. I think that sometimes where the debate, or at least a passion for me, is taking the conversation a step further to say, once you have a good leader in place, that's not enough in and of itself. Individual team members oftentimes, I think, can look to the leader and put everything back to them. Hey, you're in charge. It's up to you to make this a healthy team. If we're not healthy, that's on you. And certainly accountability falls with the leader, and that's where the buck stops. And the selection of the team is a part of the leadership and all those pieces. But each individual member on that team has responsibility to show up with personal excellence and to serve that team sacrificially. And if that's not happening, it's hard for a leader to create a high-performing team with mediocre members who are looking out for themselves. There's just so much more to a high-performing team than effective leadership. But I think without it, it's pretty much impossible to build.
Yeah. Okay. So now let's flip a little bit to all the observations you've seen over the years of teams, for lack of a better word, crashing and burning right there in front of you. So when they crash and burn, what are some of the common reasons why you see a team that's trying to go through this experience that you set up for them, and all of a sudden it just goes south real fast?
Yes. And it does happen. It happens to other teams. It happens to our team. It happens. Teams crash and burn. We have those moments. And some of those are snapshots, and some of those are examples of a truly toxic or dysfunctional environment. I think the number one thing that derails teams is selfishness. I think individual selfishness and self-preservation, and that can show up in a lot of ways. And that is, I say that, Brandon, but it's not necessarily intended to be quite the negative connotation that it comes out with, because we all, I shouldn't speak for everyone else. I am selfish. It's natural to look out for myself. I think about my self-preservation. What am I getting what I need from this team experience? What's my future? How do I get that? And so I think when team members come into the group thinking, it's like Remember the Titans, if anyone's seen that movie, and there's that classic scene towards the beginning where Gary Bertier and Julius Campbell are having the conversation, and one of them says, listen, we don't have a team, so I'm going to look out for me and I'm going to get mine. And the other says, that's the worst attitude I've ever heard. And they had this sort of conversation. But I think we get into that mode where we say, I'm going to take care of me. I'm going to get my stuff done. And when that happens, it's contagious. and then you have a group of individuals working alongside each other. You don't actually have a team. And that's a different thing. So that's one thing. I think another thing that derails teams is just a lack of training. It's their skills. Being a high performing team requires talent, but it also takes skills. And just like anything else, we have to learn how to do it. I think we assume that working with other people in a team should just be an innately known thing because we're people and we grow up around others. But to truly engage in a healthy way with other people is hard. Everyone has different experiences, different personalities, different desires. And we tend to see the world through our own worldview and lens and just naturally assume that others are the same. And when they're different, it must be because they're doing it wrong. And so how do I help them see what would be better for them? And that's kind of back to that selfish perspective. So we have to learn how to be aware of what others bring to the table, what techniques and skills allow us to serve one another, to hear one another well, and to accomplish the purpose we set out to do. And that becomes a more fulfilling environment for everyone because they're able to use their skills well.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to build on that last one because it made me think of probably the number one obstacle in all workplaces today with all teams. So we talk about nonprofit teams, church teams, university teams, corporate teams, doesn't matter. Number one issue, time. No one has it. So you just said training, right? Training takes time. We got to stop what we're doing for a moment or some days and then actually work together. So how do we how can we find ways to either work that in our routine, prioritize it? How can we make that happen in our calendar? Because that seems to be the biggest issue that I encounter with all the teams I work with.
Yeah, and it is a real challenge. You're right, Brandon. I mean, and I think speaking that is helpful to say, that is going to be a challenge that people will face. And I think perhaps one of the first things that needs to happen is we have to recognize that building the team is the work. It's part of the work. It's not extra. So I think that sometimes we think, if I'm going to do that on the side, then I have to make time for this extra thing that's not really part of the work. But if we can recognize that team skills are skills that are just as important as any other time management skills or leadership skills or a system I need to learn for work, that team skills are on the same playing field when it comes to how well we'll do things. I think if we could also take a step back and understand the time lost through dysfunctional relationships at work, then I think the amount of time it takes to invest in the team would start to look like a very small investment. Because when you take the number of conversations that you have to have 6 times, the 4 conversations that happen after, 2 individuals at work aren't able to relate well, and then I have to talk to this person, and then talk to my boss, and then I'm coming back over here. And now we've spent a day engaging about something that didn't go well that could have potentially been resolved if we had a healthier dynamic as a unit. And so I think that those 2 things, identifying it as part of the work and recognizing the time lost when we don't invest in it would probably create a lot of space to put time towards it.
Beautiful. Makes a lot of sense. And then as we're talking, maybe think of another question. So often common challenge for all managers and leaders. I got this person and they're on the team and they're technically really sound. They're really competent, but boy, do they throw a lot of elbows and step on a lot of toes. What's your thought around how do we try and help them resolve that? And then at what point do we say, look, we just got to move on from this person, because to keep them on, it's only going to create more dysfunction with the team, create a toxic team. It's always that debate. How long do we hang on with this person? And I've heard so many schools of thought. Often you'll see, entrepreneurs tell the same story. I held on to this one person way too long. Right. And then now I've learned, now they almost swing the other way. They're like, oh, they looked at me funny. I let them go the next day. So it's always this debate of, how do we try and help them get healthy? And then at what point do we just kind of cut our losses? So what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's interesting. And probably part of the reason it's such an ongoing conversation is because it is attention and there is no cut and dry answer. If there was, I guess we would have found it. But as we explore that and we try to sense, when is that right time? Maybe some things we can ask ourselves to help us make the decision of how long is too long or those sorts of things. Because I just want to take a moment and affirm, absolutely, A toxic team member can take a team down. I mean, it is really hard to have a healthy team when there's a member or members who are toxic. I think as a leader of a team, and I've wrestled with this question myself, you have to first ask yourself, what's going on here in me? What are my motives? Am I for this person? Have I demonstrated I am for their success? Have they heard that from me and seen that from me? And does the team know that I'm for the team's success and for the success of each member? And when I ask that question, I think it allows me to really challenge myself as a leader to think through whether I've done the things that are necessary to help this person have the best opportunity to succeed. So have I sought to understand what might be driving some of the toxic behaviors? Have I had a conversation that's candid to give them the feedback that they need to be successful? Have I communicated the behaviors that are harming the team? Have I asked them questions to understand what's driving those behaviors? Have I asked them the question that says, as a leader, are you getting from me what you need? And if not, what is that? And then that can create a dialogue, because sometimes what they need from you may be something you can't give, or it may be something that you see differently, but that dialogue is critical. And I think the question around, am I for this person in the team, kind of challenges us as leaders to go down that list of things to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help this person have a successful engagement with the team. So that's kind of step one. I think once you've done that and you really feel like every opportunity has been provided, there's been training, coaching, feedback, et cetera, then I think you probably are, the tendency probably is to hang on too long. I think we're always afraid to exit someone from a team or experience, because I shouldn't say always. It's common that we get afraid to do that because we think, I don't want to fail this person. What if I'm not seeing it correctly? And I think we do have to give ourselves permission for us and for the team member and others around that team member to say, this may not be the right fit, and we want you to be successful, and maybe that's going to have to be somewhere else. I think that maybe a last note on that would be, as a leader, remind yourself that you and that person are not the only ones involved. There's an entire team here, and we're called to steward. As leaders, we're stewarding an opportunity for someone who's asked us to lead. And so if we're allowing a team member to prevent us from accomplishing what we set out to do, then I could potentially be stewarding my position poorly, because I'm not honoring what I've been asked to do and leading this group to bring impact or accomplish great things.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's funny because in all the cases when you've heard the same thing, when they have made that decision to exit someone who was a poor fit, you hear the same thing. The team just says, "Oh, I breathed a sigh of relief." You could feel the difference in the team.
Yes.
Okay, so this brings me to at least one of the issues that I'm seeing today that's very real and current, and that is the extremely tight labor market. So this has two effects. First, it has the effect of, well, I got this person, and they're either not very competent, or they have really got a bad attitude, or both. But I've already got 5 open seats. If I remove them, now I've got 6 open seats, and now that's an issue. So I'm just going to hang on to them for a little bit longer. I'm hearing a lot of that, which means you're really not getting a lot of high-performing teams if you got folks like that. And then the other issue that I want to talk about with you is connected to that, and that is this whole issue of player coach. Right? So because I got these open positions, so now I got to go in and do that job. Plus, I'm supposed to be the leader of the team, but I'm leading. Am I leading? Am I doing? So in teams that are stretched really tight like that, are there any good tactics or approaches to kind of keep them at least somewhat on the edge of high performing, given their it's like a baseball field, a baseball team. I don't have a shortstop. I don't have a center fielder. And I'm really not even sure if my first baseman even knows what they're doing, but we got to go out and play a game. So how do you kind of do that? So any thoughts you've got around that?
Goodness. Yeah. In the labor shortage, I mean, it's a challenge. It's a real thing. And I appreciate the question, because I think it's helpful to not provide responses when we talk about teams or leadership or any type of development that it just sound like, well, that would be great in the world that you're talking about. But in the real world, where I'm actually doing the work, some of those things don't play out. And so I think that is a real need. A couple of things that come to mind. One is there's a difference between we have to decide what are the areas where I need a shortstop. Like that's an essential position on the team. And what are the situations where we're talking about work that may not have to be done? So whenever we have a shortage of labor, or we find ourselves as a leader having to perform as a player coach, or we're asking team members to do double duty, or we're trying to consider, are we leaving a team member in place who's actually not serving us well, but they're filling a seat, and we have to kind of get that job done. I think it's an opportunity, first of all, to do a bit of an audit and to say, is there any area in which we are doing work that does not have to be done, that's not a high leverage activity and not driving the results that we're seeking? Because if that's the case, then we can eliminate that or automate that or do something different with it that will take some of that burden off and change the conversation a bit. So that might be step one, is to make sure, first of all, that everything you're doing is essential in driving, the results you're seeking. I think that another component there would be to say, as leader, and I think that's really critical for leaders who are playing the player coach role, because it's easy for us to look at everything we're doing and then just start picking up tasks when there's a shortage because it's been being done. Now somebody's not doing it, so I'll just step in and do it without really taking first the step back to say, wait a minute, before I just pick up that, does it have to be done? Does it have to be done now? Does it have to be done by someone in our organization? All that kind of thing. Could it be done next year? Is that, all those things. So that could be a helpful piece there. I think another component relating to the first situation you mentioned about the team member is, I would think really hard about letting someone stay in a role because I need that seat filled if they're truly toxic. So if there's someone who's really causing discord, then probably the amount of work that's being created around that is outweighing what they're really providing. If it's just that we're saying they're not as highly skilled as the person we would like to have in the role, or there's just, then that may be a different conversation, because again, like you said, if it's an essential role, we may need that done. And then over time, if the coaching's not there and labor changes, then we have an opportunity to, if their performance continues to lag, to find someone who could replace them that would maybe be able to accomplish the task more successfully, and would be more fulfilling for them than someone in a role that they're not able to do, with excellence there. But that is a tough one. I think that evaluating the work would be a great first step.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's a nice kind of pairing of the solution. It's like, let's be really thoughtful and intentional about what really matters, but also don't be afraid to be courageous.
Right.
And have the tough conversations or tough decisions around not only prioritization, but even, cultural fit. We're gonna remove our second baseman, even though we're short staffed, because he just doesn't play nice with the rest of the players on the field. So
well, and I think that one thing you might find is if someone is not playing nice and causing harm, removing that person is probably more likely that everybody else in the field is going to say, I can cover a little more territory, because I see that my leader is willing to fight for the culture that we are trying to create, no matter what that costs. And so I'm gonna give a little bit more in this season, because if that leader, if he or she is saying, I'm willing to make a hard decision for the sake of this culture, then everybody else is going to step in and protect that too. But the same thing is true if everybody sees, I think this person is just kind of going along to get along, to not rock the boat, to make sure, then everybody else kind of says, maybe this culture isn't what I thought it was. And then maybe I start to think about exiting. And now we have a whole other problem, because my top talent is also left. And I'm left with, a few mediocre players who are here, and the top talent running for the doors. And I would much rather do things to preserve that top talent.
Yeah, agreed. So Rusty, just as kind of a final question around teams, any other big themes or patterns you're seeing out in the world today that would be important for leaders to be thinking of when they're trying to build high performing teams, or any other best practices?
I think, let me see if I can think of a pattern. I do think that we're seeing a shift, at least what I think is a shift, where people are talking more about relationships at work. I think that's not brand new, but I think we've been seeing that where there are a lot of thought leaders in the marketplace who are talking about that. Leaders seem to be more open to that. And so what typically has been a little bit of a, hey, do we really need this whole idea of relationships, the workplace, and aren't we here to get stuff done? I think we're seeing a shift there. And that's a good thing, because I think when we can balance results and relationships, that's huge. So I think my thought there would be to say, don't miss that. As leaders don't assume that relationships are just a kind of a nice to have, or the community is in the workplace is sort of a, hey, if it happens, great. But take this moment to say, yes, people want it. They're asking for it. And it is not it is not a perk. It's a lubricant that kind of greases the wheels of teams. It's an essential. But when we add community and healthy relationships, we can propel the work that we're doing far beyond what we might expect, and take that 1 + 1 + 1, not equal 3, but to equal 5, 6, 7, and really propel our teams.
Yeah, I love that idea. I think it goes right in next to or in the bucket of training, because it feels like, we're not doing the work. We're building relationships. Feels like it could be labeled by some inappropriately or inaccurately as waste of time.
Right.
And yet it's so really important because there's a payoff in the back end of it.
Yes.
It makes things run more smoothly, like the lubricant example. That's great. Well, Rusty, okay, so when I get close to the end of any show, I always ask all my guests this question. What is one life hack you have for us for how we can either have better conversations or better relationships, either at work or at home?
Okay, I'm going to give you one that I've been really working on. So I'm hopeful. I'm thinking it's going to help me, and so maybe it'll help someone else. So one of the things that I find about myself, and maybe somebody else can relate to this, is when I'm in conversations, when someone shares a challenge with me in a team setting or an individual setting, just one-on-one, my first inclination, the way I'm wired, is to think about solutions. How do I help this? And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. It's that I need to fix, I want to help. And so I've decided that you've got a challenge, you put it on the table, you share it with the team. Here are 16 things you might want to try, and let's go. And what I've learned is, especially with there's individual members of our team who have communicated this, is that that's actually not helpful at all. But what would be more helpful is to start over, and to, at the beginning of that, when someone shares something, the question that I can ask is, what would be most helpful to you right now? Now that you've shared that, what would be most helpful to you? And that creates space for the person to say, yeah, I really just needed everyone in the room to kind of nod and go, boy, that's tough. And then we go from there. Or I need some solutions. Can we please brainstorm about that for 15 minutes or whatever it might be? But it really sets the conversation up to be one of how do I serve versus I'm just here to kind of fix. And I think that relates back to the larger picture of serving others being kind of this fundamental success component for teams as opposed to selfishness. I think that's a very practical way to put that in place in any relationship, a team at home, a marriage, anything. So,
yeah, I was thinking the same thing. You could use that question in pretty much any situation where someone's coming to you with a problem or an issue.
Yes.
Yeah. That's great. Well, Rusty, this was amazing. Thanks for all your insights and perspectives and great advice. So if people want to learn more about you, learn more about WinShape, where can they go?
Sure. Yeah. So WinShape's website, or WinShape Teams' website, is very easy. Just WinShapeTeams.org. So you can find out anything about WinShape Teams there. My colleague, Russ Surratt, and I recently wrote a book. We published it last year, and it's called Teamwork. Very clever. And it's 13 timeless principles for creating success and fulfillment in a team. So that idea there, it really is written to the individual team member. How do I, when I'm not the leader, show up and serve in a way that helps us be successful? And so it's a really practical tool. And you can find that anywhere that you can, that books are sold. Another neat resource that might be fun for people to check out is a documentary that we produced with a great partner of ours in Atlanta, and it's on an adventure racing team, the world's best adventure racing team out of New Zealand. And we studied them in the World Championships in 2018 and in New Zealand to find out what makes a sustained high-performing team. They've won 5 years in a row in a grueling endurance sport, and that's called For the Team, and it's on YouTube and Amazon Prime. It's about 37 minutes, and it's a great. When we're thinking about moving to high performance, sometimes what we need is inspiration to say what's possible. That's a great tool to watch and say what could be, and then what are some things I could probably do to get there. So those would be some places I might point people to check out.
Great. And I think your book is right behind you, if I see it correctly.
Yes.
If you could hold it up and put it there, it is. There's the book.
There it is. Teamwork. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for that. Yep.
Excellent. Well, Rusty, this was great. Thank you so much. I know there's so many folks. I took lots of notes. I know so many folks got so much out of this. So I really, really appreciate your time, your perspectives, and the gift that you are. So keep up the great work. And I look forward to having you on the show again, because we never did talk about virtual teams. That's a whole other animal. So sounds like another show in our future.
Yes, no time, but what a pleasure, Brandon. What a great conversation. It's just a privilege to talk with you. Thanks for your investment in teams and in leaders through this podcast and all the other ways. The more strong, healthy, fulfilling teams that are out there, the better. So thanks for your work, and excited to be with you.
I said, that was a great show. What I loved about Rusty's points was they were so just precise and prescriptive. I mean, this is stuff that we can do right away. So he opens by saying, hey, we talk about leadership all the time, but we really don't talk much about teams. And then I dug in a little bit more and I said, well, what makes a high-performing team? And he said, well, they're both achieve their purpose, but the people there are also feeling very fulfilled. And then he went in and unpacked that a little bit. He said, in order to do that well, we've got to have high trust, high safety. We got to encourage one another, even engage in healthy conflict. And he said, gosh, this all takes time. Then we went into some points that I thought were really unique that I hadn't heard before. He talked about what it means to have a healthy team member. He said, you really want healthy team members. He said, one of the things you can look for is just their general discipline outside of work. What's their routine at night when they go to sleep? What's their routine in the morning to get ready for the day? How are their overall relationships with others, inside and outside of work? We talked about the role of a leader. He said, gosh, you can have a high-performing, great leader. That doesn't guarantee you a perfect high-performing team, but you can't have a high-performing team without a strong leader because they have such a big influence. And so we talked about warning signs for teams. And he said there was really a couple. Selfishness is one, and then just not dedicating the time to training. And that's where we got into that big issue we're all facing today, time. How do we work in time? And he said, you've got to think of it not as a waste of time, but as a way to get more performance and avoid a lot of the issues and fires you'd have to clean up down the road by investing a little bit of time today. Then we talked about the two other big issues that I see today, which is when do we let someone go and the role of player coach. And he basically said, look, in both those cases, if you've got someone who's toxic, you've got to let them go. And because that's going to communicate to the team that you're supportive to the other team members and you care about them. If you keep that person around, you're going to lose your A players. But in order to feel good about that, you've got to ask yourself the question, do I feel like I was for that person? Did I really support the person and give them a fighting chance? That's really, really important. And then finally, on the role of player coach, that's the reality we're all facing. We're understaffed. We all are. So we're jumping in and doing jobs. He said, be really, really intentional about thinking about what are the positions on the field I have to have right now? What are the jobs that we have to get done right now? And be really, really clear on that and have those difficult conversations and be both not only intentional, but also courageous.